Hello everyone. So today we're going to talk about a digital IR sensor. Digital IR. And a digital IR sensor is basically a sensor that acts like a trip switch. When something gets some distance close to it, then it trips and sends out a digital signal, either a 1 or a 0. That's all it does. And the way an ultra-infrared sensor works, if you haven't seen it before, the transmitter sends out infrared light in some direction so that if it hits an obstacle, that light comes onto it, bounces off, comes back to the receiver right here, and from that information it's able to determine the distance to the object. It's very similar to an ultrasonic sensor, except you're using light instead of sound waves. Now these sensors are fairly cheap. They're about $2 or $3 generally, or maybe up to $5 depending on where you're getting them. You can see on the back here it has a couple of potentiometers. This will vary from one sensor to the next. In this case, generally what the potentiometers are used for is to vary what this distance is, when the sensor will trip. If you move it very close, you can adjust the potentiometer so it trips when you're a little bit far, when you're at this distance, or you can trim the potentiometer to trip when you're at this distance. And the potentiometer is basically just changing the distance at which this senses an obstacle. And again, all it does is you have several pins coming out the back here. You have a ground, a positive, negative, and an out. The fourth one in this case is an enable pin, which you do not need. Don't worry about that. Almost all of these sensors you have will have 3. Just a positive, a negative, and a digital I/O out. So basically, at the end of it all, this IR sensor, these proximity sensors, digital proximity sensors, behave like a switch. When they get so close to something, they trip and they send a true signal out of the sensor, and when they're far away from the thing, they release and they send a 0 signal out to your Arduino. And that's all there is to it. These are very useful for wall following sensors and maybe some basic obstacle avoidance, but they're not very powerful because you're only getting that 1 or 0 out of it. But they are cheap and plentiful.